Hello and welcome to aptdemy. My name is Joshi and I will be your English professor for the SAT English course. Today's session is going to be all about the basic approach and beyond to SAT reading. These are all the topics that are going to be covered in today's session. So as you can remember, in the last session, we all learned that SAT reading can be quite tricky. In today's session, we are going to see why SAT reading is difficult and we are going to learn about all the methods and strategies we can use to combat that. Firstly, let us look at why SAT reading is difficult. As we all know, SAT is a time-bound examination. The total duration of the SAT exam is 3 hours, and out of those 3 hours, you get 65 minutes for the reading section. And that is not a lot of time to read through all the passages and work through the questions and answers. The second point is the passages are long. Now, an average passage can be ranging from 90 to 95 lines, and that's a long passage, and it might cause you to lose your concentration. The third point is you end up reading a lot of unnecessary information. As you know that whatever you are reading, you are going to ask questions on it. So what happens is a student reads word for word in a sentence and ends up reading a lot of information that is not required and that will not be asked out of them. Number 4 and number 5 are alike. Sometimes the language of the questions may be such that it can confuse you between two options. Two options might look like the correct answer and you might get confused and lose a lot of time. Our basic approach should always be designed in such a way that all of these can be addressed. And as I always said, SAT does not score you on reading, so do not just start reading aimlessly. SAT does not score you on reading the passage, right? I'm telling you again that SAT does not score you on reading the passage. SAT scores you on getting to the correct answer. A lot of times what happens is when a student sees a long passage, they start reading sentences word for word. They try to understand the meaning of every word in the sentence, and on not doing so, they keep rereading it again. And by the end of it, they forget what was written and they look at the questions and go back to read that. That's a lot of time wasted, and with SAT, every minute counts. You cannot afford to lose out even a minute. So today we are going to look at all the strategies we can use to avoid all of this. So the first thing to do is to read the blurb. The SAT provides you with a blurb at the beginning of the passage. The blurb is mostly written in italics. It gives you a basic idea on the author, the background of the passage, and what the passage is about. Second thing that you can do is always read the entire passage. Many books and many tutors will advocate you against this. They will advise you not to read the entire thing and to just read 2 or 3 lines above the question that is mentioned. Do not do that. We do not advise that, and that's not a good strategy, because remember that SAT is taking this reading test to assess you on your comprehension skills. And how will you comprehend a passage if you don't read it completely? Now, you might say that just now you told me that SAT does not give us marks on reading. That is right. I told you that because we do not want you to spend excessive amounts of time in understanding word for word. But what you need to do, however, is read the entire passage to understand the purpose of the passage, why the author has written the passage, the different tones, the connections and transitions between the passage, which is important, and you will be needing these to answer questions. It might look like it will take a lot of time, but believe me, by using this strategy, you will save a lot of time, because when you look at the questions, you won't be needing to go back to the passage to answer the questions. You can eliminate the wrong answers straight away from just looking at the options. The next thing that you need to do is pay attention to the transition words. When I say read the entire passage, you not only read them to know what the passage is about, you also read to know the connection between the paragraphs. For example, let us say a passage is about the discovery that has been made by a new group of scientists. So maybe it is about a new scientific discovery. Now the second passage starts with the word however, which is a transition word. So now by reading the word however, you already know that the second paragraph might provide you with a contradicting view or maybe a negative comment on the finding. So this is important. So if you know the transition and the flow of thoughts within the passage, you will be able to answer questions easily, because whatever option does not go with what the paragraph states, that can be eliminated right away. The next thing that you need to do is come up with the purpose of the passage at the end. You always need to come up with the purpose, or why the author has written this passage. Now this not only gives you an idea of what the passage is about, it also clears the tone of the passage for you. For example, it might be positive where the author is supporting something. It might be negative where the author is advocating against something, and it might be neutral where the author is just describing you about an event or a species or say a scientific discovery. So you need to understand what kind of a passage this is, what is the tone of the passage. One good tip that you can use is when you read the passage with a pencil, just mark a plus sign for a positive tone, negative minus sign for a negative tone, and a hashtag for a neutral tone in the passage. And in this way, not only will you be more involved in the passage, you will also not lose your concentration. Next is predict the answer. You should always have a basic answer in mind. Always remember, if you don't know what you're looking for, you will feel lost in the options. So having an answer in mind helps you to locate what exactly you are looking for. It also helps in the process of elimination, which is the next step that we are going to use. Process of elimination saves a lot of time for us to not get lost in the answer choices. So whenever you see an answer choice which is extreme or which is contradicting to what the passage is saying, you can eliminate it straight away. If you can eliminate 2 options out of the 4, it makes your job easier. You are left with 2, whichever seems like the correct answer. And if you can eliminate 3, then you're just left with the correct answer. So process of elimination is very vital when you're choosing the right answer. Now when I say correct answer, you need to keep 3 things in mind when you're choosing the correct answer. You need to look at the line and paragraph references. So you need to read the questions and look at what line has been asked or what sentence reference has been asked, and you need to go back to the paragraph and underline it so you know what it is saying. And in cases where there is no line reference given, there will be some vital words. There will be some lead words, maybe a proper noun, maybe a numerical, maybe written in italics. You need to underline that as well. And always remember that the questions are in order. So the question follows the order of the passage. So in case you are stuck in one question, you can always go back to the answer of the previous question to work through the next answer. So it always follows the sequence of the passage. Next thing is the process of elimination criteria. As I already mentioned, process of elimination criteria is very vital to reach to your correct answer. Now often we have seen there are most 4 types of common answer traps that are given that students fall for. Number 1 is mostly right and slightly wrong answers. Now what happens is these answers look almost perfect until you look at them closely. There might be 1 or 2 words that do not go by what the passage is mentioning. If the answer option is long, use a pencil to break down into small bits and pieces and analyze it. If there is 1 or 2 words that do not go, or maybe an extreme word like all or never, always mark that option as invalid, because the SAT will never have an extreme answer as the correct one. Next one is could be true. Now these options seem logical and they also go by your outside knowledge, but remember, SAT is not an essay or a discussion. Here your own interpretation or your outside knowledge is not rewarded. So whatever is there in the passage and whatever is there supported by the textual support of the passage, that will be the correct answer. So if you see yourself justifying an answer by your outward knowledge, that answer will be invalid. The next type of tricky answer is right words, wrong meaning. Now what happens in these answer choices is that they use words from here and there in the passage, and students think, okay, this word matches something that I read in the passage, and they blindly go for that answer without making sure that this answers the question or this goes completely by what the passage states. Do not just go blindly by matching words. Read the answers properly and understand it, and see only if the passage supports it textually. Go for that answer. And the last type of tricky answer would be right answer, wrong question. Over here, one of the main things that you need to do is read the question properly. Sometimes what happens is in the options, you might get an option which is there in the passage stated, but it might not answer the question given at hand. So always understand what the question is asking you, and then go for the answer that answers that question and not something else. So to summarize, things that you need to be on a lookout for is distortion of details from the passage, so they are no longer correct. So any option that is distorted or contradicting from what the passage is saying or out of scope will be held invalid. A true statement from the passage, but one that doesn't answer the question, like we discussed, an option might be there which is stated in the passage, but one that doesn't answer the question at hand, that is wrong. Out of scope information that may appear logical but that is not mentioned or implied anywhere in the passage. Anything that needs your own justification, anything that only is supported by your outside knowledge will not be valid in the SAT reading test. And lastly, extreme or strongly worded options like never, always, these are extreme words, and I have always stressed on the fact that extreme options are a big red flag. If you see words like never, always, or an extreme option, always eliminate it at sight. Now that we know what the answer traps are, let us see how to get to the correct answer. Use a pencil to highlight points in a passage. As we know that SAT is a pencil and paper test, right? Use that pencil, make that use. Okay, whenever you see an important point or a line reference in italics, always underline so that after reading you know where that line is, or you do not have to reread the entire passage again to understand where that particular piece of information is. Whatever is important for you, underline it. Next, always have an answer in mind before answering the question. This is very important. Like I said, if you do not know what you're looking for, you will be lost and you might get confused after reading the answer options. So always after reading the passage, have an answer in mind so you know what you're looking for, and the answer option that is closely matched to that thing in your mind, you go for that option. Next, make sure you go through all the options from A to D. Sometimes what happens is you look through the option A and it seems like a perfect answer, and you skip all the options and you just blindly take A as. It might be the case that B was the correct answer because B had better information and B was more suitable to be the answer to that question. So do not take that risk. Read all the options and only go for that option which suits the question. Next is we have seen how to approach, right? We have spoken about all the strategies, all the answer traps, all of that we don't need to do, and all of the do's and don'ts, right? So let us apply those strategies in reading through a passage right now. So this is the passage. Feel free to pause this video and read it out. We will be discussing about how to read this passage later on. Okay, now that you've read the passage, let us talk about what did you do? How did you read? Let us compare your strategy with ours. So like I said, that the first line of the passage is very important because it usually gives us an idea of what the entire passage is going to be about. And when we read this passage, we clearly saw that the passage was talking about this rare water bird. Right? So that gives us an idea, and that also tells us that this is going to be a biological science passage. Now, what you have to do, one important tip is to understand the change of tone or the flow of thoughts and the transition between paragraphs. Always read the paragraphs and make a summary in your mind. You can also use your pencil to write it down at the sidebar of the passage, the summary of each and every passage. So when we read the first passage, when we read the first paragraph of the passage, what did we see? That the first paragraph talks about introduction of the rare water bird and discusses its distribution. So why did the author write the first paragraph? To introduce us with the rare water bird and to discuss its distribution. That is the summary. Now the summary, as I said, it helps us to understand the transition and the connection between paragraph to paragraph. Next, when we were reading the second paragraph, what did we find? That the second paragraph started with the word enigmatic. So it tells us that the bird is related to enigmatic, so it has like a mysterious quality to it. And why was the second paragraph written? The second paragraph was written to discuss the habitat of the rare water bird and also to state that the information available about the bird is limited and inconclusive, which is also supported by words such as but and although, which are transition words. So you know that a lot of information about this bird is unknown and there are a lack of facts about the numbers of these birds and the actual graphical distribution is not given. What did we see in the third paragraph? Now the third paragraph further stressed on the uncertainty and mystery aspect of the bird. And why was the third paragraph written? What was the purpose of the third paragraph? The third paragraph was written to discuss about the numbers of the bird that has been declining, even though exact date of decline was not available. So again, it stresses on the fact that exact factual data is limited and inconclusive. Now, after summarizing all the paragraphs, what do? We discuss, we think about the purpose of the passage to understand the tone. So now, what do you think? Was it positive? Was it negative? Was it neutral? This passage was a neutral one because the author was not supporting anything, was not advocating against. He was just telling us about this water bird, right? So this will be considered a neutral passage. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind is do not confuse the author's views with his statements. Let us look at an example to understand this. So, for example, if the author were to write, the critics argue that Gardner's definition of intelligence is too broad and that his 8 different intelligences simply represent talents, personality traits, and abilities. Gardner's theory also suffers from a lack of supporting empirical research. Do not think that this is what the author is saying. The author is simply stating what the critics of this work has stated. So this helps you to not get confused because a lot of questions might ask you the viewpoint of the author, whereas other questions might ask you the viewpoint of the author's work that is being talked about. So do not get confused between the views of the author and the statements. Now, before wrapping up this session, let us quickly sum up how to read a passage. So when you get a passage, what do? First, we read the passage completely. We read the entire passage. Next, we start summarizing its paragraphs to understand the connection between them, to understand the transition and to understand the purpose of the paragraph as to why the author wrote the paragraph. The next step is to come up with the purpose of the entire passage, to understand its tone, to come up with the tone. Is it positive, is it negative, or is it neutral? And the fourth one is when you are answering questions, you always need to look out for the traps that sat throw at you. You need to look at all the points that we discussed, the things that you do not need to fall for, and then choose them wisely and eliminate all the invalid questions. So with that, we come to the end of today's topic, and these are the references that you can use for further insight. And do not forget to tune in to our additional PDF files that we at aptdemy specially curate for you after every session for you to take one step closer to your perfect score. Thank you, and I will meet you in the next session.